Hi there, it's Friday the 29th of May 2020. This week we've been looking at Jesus on his own, Jesus being alone. And all of us are alone at some times in life, of course. Loneliness is not a good thing, it's a bad thing, but sometimes being on our own is necessary for us to face certain things in life, just as Jesus had to do. He, first of all, was in the desert alone when he faced temptation and tests to his courage, to his obedience, to his moral character. And those are tests which we can only face on our own. Then Jesus was on the mountainside when he drew apart from the crowd to regain his strength, his energy. And we need to do that as well. Whether we're extrovert or introvert, there are times we need to draw apart and recharge our batteries. And then yesterday, Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was facing his greatest mental challenge, his mental battle that he had to face, thinking about going to the cross and all that entailed. But first of all, he had to win the mental battle, and he could only do that on his own. And then finally today, we're looking at Jesus on a hill. And that hill, of course, is the hill that's referred to in Luke chapter 23 and verse 33. And it says this: when they came to the place called the Skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus, although surrounded by people, was alone and on his own when he went to the cross to take the punishment for the sins of every person, you and me and everyone, and died in our place. And it's the wonderful news of the gospel, of course, that if we will believe in that and believe in Jesus, then he will truly forgive our sins and come and live within us. What an amazing promise that is. But on that hill, that Skull Hill, he was alone. Golgotha in the Aramaic, in the Latin it's Calvaria, from which we get Calvary. It's the place of the skull where there was executions taking place. Possibly the hill itself looked like a skull. It was an intimidating place. And what did Jesus face alone on that Skull Hill? Well, first of all, he faced pain and suffering alone. And all of us face pain and suffering in our lives. And while we have friends and family to comfort us, while we have wonderful NHS staff to try and take care of us and help us, ultimately we are the ones who bear the pain. I've been bearing pain in my joints and my legs for 10 years, and for 10 years I've not been able to walk without pain any day of my life. Maybe you know what it's like to face ongoing pain. It's very hard to face. It's very difficult. And Jesus, he faced supreme pain and suffering in the lead up to the cross and when he was nailed to the cross and all that was done to him. The amazing thing is that in Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 10, it says this: it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. You know, it was God's will for Jesus to suffer. And sometimes God takes us into times of suffering. But God is with us in our suffering, just as he was with Jesus in his suffering. So although Jesus was alone in his suffering, actually he wasn't completely alone. And actually we are never alone, because God is always with us. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. On the cross, Jesus faced pain and suffering. Secondly, he faced rejection and ridicule from his disciples. They all abandoned him, from the crowds. They shouted abuse at him. And Jesus bore all of that. And on the cross, as he was bearing all the punishment for the sins of mankind, as God poured out his wrath upon Jesus, he shouted out to God, "Why have you forsaken me?" He even felt forsaken by God his Father. But of course, God did not abandon him. God never abandons us. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verses 8 to 9, these words are said by Paul. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. You know, God was still with Jesus, even on the cross. And it says that Jesus committed his spirit into God's hands when he died. He knew that God was still with him, even though he might have felt forsaken, even though we might feel forsaken by God. God never forsakes us. He faced pain and suffering, he faced rejection and ridicule, and ultimately he faced death. He faced the fear of death and the uncertainty of death. But even in death, God was with him. God is with us. Though we might feel alone in life, he is with us through all times. God bless you. Speak to you again soon.